She obviously was trying to basically fool everyone into thinking she had to raise income tax. And it also proves in their eyes that the decision then to U-turn and not raise income tax was nothing to do with the economy, as was claimed, because the economy had got better, because she already knew it was better. What they claim is that it was clearly a nakedly political decision, because they realized that if they went ahead with that plan, her and Sakir Star would be finished politically. So this is all getting quite tense. Good morning, Rod. So, yes, the Chancellor has obviously faced a bruising few days after delivering her budget. That always seemed inevitable. But what was not expected was that we would end up with this what seems to be an open row between the Treasury and the Office for Budget Responsibility. Now, both sides would deny that that's what this is, but just so your listeners understand what's happened is yesterday the head of the OBR, Richard Hughes, published a letter to the Treasury Select Committee, basically setting out precisely when Rachel Reeves had the latest economic forecasts at her fingertips as she was putting the budget together. And this letter was incredibly insightful because what it showed is that on October the 31st, 4 days before Rachel Reeves now gave her her speech in Downing Street, very strongly hinting that she was going to have to raise income tax. What the letter shows is that the OB had told her by that point that she was actually in the clear. And what I mean by that is that they were projecting that she was going to have a £4 billion surplus by the time of the budget. Now, so obviously the immediate reaction to that has been, well, Rachel Reeves then got up and told the nation that the economic circumstances were terrible, that the OBR had given a very negative productivity downgrade, which had knock-on effects for the economy. And by extension, that meant less tax receipts for the Treasury, meaning she was going to have to make some very difficult decisions. So this is all not great for the Chancellor, because the opposition parties have seized on this and said, well, look, she's clearly just misled the nation, because she obviously was trying to basically fool everyone into think she had to raise income tax. And it also proves in their eyes that the decision then to U-turn and not raise income tax was nothing to do with the economy as was claimed, because the economy had got better, because she already knew it was better. What they claim is that it was clearly a nakedly political decision, because they realized that if they went ahead with that plan, her and Sakir Starmer would be finished politically. So this is all getting quite tense. The Treasury overnight responded and basically said that they think the OBR has breached what they call budget security and the sanctity of those very private discussions that Treasury officials have with the OBR in the run-up to a budget. So, number 10 is downplaying, and the Treasury are very much downplaying right now the scale of this, but they're clearly, it seems very unseemly. And especially after the unprecedented leak of the budget by the OBR, it's a big almighty mess. The only thing I would say this morning, Rod, as this reaction kind of comes in, is what we hear from the Treasury is that their kind of latest response on this is, well, yes, it's correct that on October the 31st there was this $4 billion in the black figure, but it obviously did not account for the fact that Reeves had already had to U-turn on winter fuel payments, and also that they'd had to abandon their £5 billion of savings from the welfare bill over the summer. So actually, whilst it said on that piece of paper £4 billion in plus, in fact, by that point she was still facing a deficit and potentially in breach of her fiscal rules, because She had several billion, I think between 7 and 8 billion pounds of additional costs that weren't factored into all of that. But obviously, that's all very complicated. The reality is that most readers and people in the nation this morning are going to be reading a story about the chancellor being, potentially exaggerating the scale of the economic woes. Well, and indeed, there's 580,000 people who have been dragged into a higher tax band through fiscal drag, and who will be poorer as a consequence, and needn't have been is what they will be thinking, right at this moment. To what extent is the blame being apportioned to Reeves, or to an operational matter, or a lack of understanding, or to her officials? Is she directly in the line of fire over this? No, absolutely. This very much sits with the chancellor. Now, what I would say is I think it would be very hard to make an argument that, based on the reasonings I just set out about the fact that she had this winter fuel thing to contend with, and welfare, the welfare rebellion, I think it'd be very difficult for anybody to say, categorically, the Prime Minister has lied. Oh, sorry, the Chancellor has lied about the state of the economy. You could definitely make an argument she has exaggerated just how bad things are. What I would say is that what the Chancellor said publicly was one story. What we definitely know is that in the run-up to the budget, there were lots of off-their-cord briefings which clearly originated from the Treasury. And they were far more explicit. They were talking about a 20 to 30 billion pound black hole. And that was a total work of fiction, Rod. That never was the case. The OBR documents and the letter that Richard Hughes has published show that. So they were off the record. They clearly weren't the Chancellor, but there were people in that building who were clearly trying to create a narrative that didn't exist, and they probably never thought that it would be disproven in this way. It's fairly outrageous, it seems to me, but I'm naive on this issues. I suppose the question that one asks politically, I suppose economically, the country is still heading for bankruptcy, but the political question is, have Starr and Reeves emerged stronger at the end of the week than they were at the start of it, given the grave predictions as to what would happen as a consequence of the budget? It depends on what audience you want to look at. So let's just take their short-term survival in Westminster. Let's take that, and then let's go to the public reaction. They have secured their survival in their jobs. Certainly until the local elections. I think the tomic issue of the 2-child benefit cap and the lifting of that has earned the Chancellor the goodwill of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Now, there has been a row back on the employment rights bill. The reality is that whilst that will be unpopular in some elements, and some left-wing MPs, generally, it's not as important to Labour MPs as taking children out of poverty. So they have managed to get the goodwill of the party. And also, on top of that, what Rachel Reeves has done with this budget. And we will be hearing time and time again over the next few days from ministers, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister himself, is she has created a retail offer to voters that Labour canvases, Labour MPs can go and sell on the doorstep in the run-up to the local elections. She has basically sprayed money at voters and to Scotland and Wales in key seats across the country that are vulnerable to reform because she's promised £150 off your energy bills. She's frozen rail fares. She's frozen prescriptions, medical prescriptions. And these are all things that are very easy to put on campaign leaflets. And we're actually going to be having a big political campaign weekend this weekend to kick that off. So I know for a fact that a lot of Labour MPs are really grateful to have that in their arsenal as they go out on the doorstep this weekend. Now, turning to the actual electorate, and whether or not those leaflets that they pick up or those conversations they have on the doorstep will have any impact on them. Well, I think the polling that we've seen so far shows actually no. It's going to be a pretty hard sale, because regardless of the facts in that budget, regardless of the fact that the chancellor has given, she's taxed middle and higher income people and businesses more to offer and relieve the cost of living pressures on the less well off. The polling suggests that actually there is a very negative sentiment around the budget, and it hasn't shifted. And in fact, in some areas it's coarsened. Public opinion has seethed. So for example, the decision to freeze income tax thresholds, I think more people now than they did before the budget think that is a breach of the manifesto commitment not to raise taxes on working people. So how that will all play out in the coming weeks will be fascinating to watch. But I think right now we have a story of two countries. We have the political situation in Westminster, where Reeves has taken the pressure off. But I think out in the wider country, I think she's going to continue to feel voters' anger and frustration. Yeah, it was a budget really aimed at the Labour MP, with a majority of 215 inside, wasn't it? And rather than one for the good of the country, I suppose you would say, but there we are. And you throw into them Angela Reyna and what is presumably her annoyance at the end of the workers' rights bill. Yeah. So as I touched on just then, Rod, so this was interesting and also a bit puzzling, because Reeves obviously gave Labour MPs what they were after at the budget, was the lifting of a 2-child cap. But then a day later, it emerged that they had decided to resolve from one of the key commitments in that employment rights bill, which is day one rights to protection from unfair dismissal. So what we're going to have now instead is what's known as a 6-month qualification period. And then after that 6-month period, you're protected. Now that's down from 2 years. So that's why the trade union movement has broadly agreed to that compromise. But there are concerns. Everybody's waiting to see how Angela Reyna, now on the backbenches, is going to respond. We've had some indications from people who used to work with her. One of the former employment ministers, Justin Matters, is not happy. He says, "This is clearly a breach of our manifesto. We said we were going to do this, and now we're kind of retreating." But the reports in the today's papers, Rod, suggest that Angela Reyna is actually going to be her time. I think she's not going to go out and start criticizing the government. And we think the reason for that is because Starmer and a whole host of his front bench have been very clear that they would like to see Angela Reyna return to the cabinet very soon. So we are expecting that she will be delivering a series of speeches in the new year. She's going to be sticking to the subjects she cares about. So poverty, the 2-child issue, and she's going to be making a series of speeches, which we think probably she may get into the issues around employment rights. We'll have to wait and see how critical she is, but it sounds as though she wants to bite on her tongue. She doesn't want to rock the boat too much, because she really does want to be back at the forefront of politics and helping the Labour Party kind of shape its messages in the run-up to the next election. Well, indeed. She's got that mortgage to pay in Brighton as well, hasn't she? Yes, indeed she does. Yes. Harry York, thanks ever so much. Great hearing from you again. And you can read more from Deputy Political Editor Harry York in the Sunday Times tomorrow, or with a digital subscription via thetimes.com.